The blues is a very important part of jazz vocabulary, but it can be kind of difficult to get it to sit right in your solos and sound like great guitarists like George Benson or Joe Pass. In this video I'm going to show you how you can apply blues phrases to your solos and go over especially one common mistake that a lot of people make. And then I'm also going to analyze a few great examples and also quite different examples from Joe Pass, George Benson and Emily Remler. My name is Larsen. Learn jazz, make music. This example is from a great George Benson solo on Take the A Train, which is from a somewhat obscure YouTube video that I came across. And this entire solo is well worth checking out because there are really a lot of great blues phrases, and he's essentially mostly playing blues the entire solo. And he might actually have a few jazz phrases in there as well once in a while, but he will either start with a blues phrase or end with a blues phrase and always connect it back to some sort of blues feeling in there. The first phrase in this example is the pickup to the second A part. He's just playing a really straight ahead blues cliche, moving chromatically from the minor third up to the fifth. And then the rest of that phrase is really just based around the C major triad, really just the root of the chord. And I think that's something that's worth noticing with blues. You always play blues from the root of the piece. You're not really playing blues phrases from the other degrees in the scale. The way we hear blues, and you can just relate it to the way that you hear a blues in a 12-bar blues, you hear it from the root. You're not really playing blues phrases from the other degrees in the scale as much. So we have this one, and he continues, and he only uses the notes from the minor pentatonic or the blue notes like the E flat and the G flat and the B flat as leading notes in this. He's not really using them as notes that are sort of standing out or target notes in the phrases. So he's always resolving them back into the chord, which you have here with the E, the next part as well. So sliding into the E, and this is really just major pentatonic, so C major pentatonic, moving on to D7, kind of staying with that C major pentatonic sound. Sliding into the E again. And then we get a phrase that's starting off with maybe hinting a little bit at melodic minor on the D7. And then beginning as a D minor phrase. And then on the G7 he's actually using blues as a sort of dominant sound to resolve back into the tonic. So he's starting with this phrase, and that's really kind of minor blues sounding, but again resolving back into the third of the C major 7, and then we get a C major 7 line. So really just C major 7 arpeggio, again ending with the slide and sort of a blues, but a major blues sounding phrase. So what you should notice here is that George Benson is really using a lot of blues and also really mixing jazz phrases with blues phrases, but he's mostly focusing on a major blues sound, and he's using all the minor blues notes as leading notes and resolving back into the chord, which makes it a little bit more smooth and a little bit more easy to use without getting sort of that harsh sort of rock blues sound. And Joe Pass actually does this quite differently, as you'll see in the next example. There is this story that Pat Martino once talked about George Benson and then said, well, George Benson is just a blues guitar player. But if you listen to this solo, then maybe that's actually a compliment. I mean, if you want to play something and you just want to play blues on a standard and sound like this, well, it's hard to say that that's a bad thing. This example from Joe Pass is from Watch What Happens, and that's a track on actually my favorite Joe Pass album, which is called Intercontinental. Well worth checking out if you want to check out some great Joe Pass playing, then I think that's one of the first albums you should check out. What we have here is Joe Pass using really more of a minor blues sound on top of a major piece. The chord progression, ironically, to this part of the solo is actually the same as Take the A Train. So we first have 2 bars of the tonic, so E flat, and then we get the dominant, F7, and then we get a 2-5 back to the tonic sound. Joe Pass starts really just playing inside in the chord. So the first few phrases are really just E flat major 7, so, and not really blues inspired. Then we get this riff on the F7, and that's, which is, I think, mostly characterized by the rhythm. Notice that when it becomes a blues phrase, then what he's doing is that he's of course using really sort of the minor sound here. The G flat is in there on top of the F7, where we would usually expect a G, not a G flat. But he's also playing much sort of lower in the chord. It's E flat minor and it's E flat blues on top of this F7 chord. So we have the high root here, and then down to the 6. And then this, which is just a minor blues phrase. And then the first time around he resolves it back into a C minor triad. Then we get it again, so now with an octave, and really just a development of that motif on top of the F minor. And then here really just running down the minor pentatonic scale, so. And here he's not really resolving it, so you really have him using this kind of sound on top of these chords. And that is something that you will hear him do more often, and he does that differently than George Benson. So where George Benson is more going for the minor blues sound and more sort of sliding into things and making the phrasing sound like blues, Joe Pass will really go for the blues as a sound with like this. The first two examples here were really about using blues sounds in a major key. And I think that's also really where you hear it the most, and also where it maybe is a little bit the most effective. Also just because it's a little bit more outside, and most jazz standards are in a major key, not in a minor key. But you can also use it in minor. You will have examples of Wes doing it, and you will also have examples like this one from Emily Remler. The difference between the sound of the chord and the sound of the blues scale is a lot smaller in minor, because the blues scale is of course minor. So you need to bring out the blues sound in the phrasing a lot more, which of course is not that different from what George Benson is doing. But that's also what you hear in this example, that essentially what happens is that Emily Remler is just playing a little bit lower in the chord, so the phrases are much more sort of centered around the root and the third and the fifth, and not really out in the extensions because they're not a part of the blues sound. And she also uses the blue note, because that is of course one of the notes that is then going to be different and really going to help bring out the blues sound. So the first part is also just an E minor triad. She's playing softly as in a morning sunrise in E minor in this recording. So what makes this blues is just the phrasing here. And then the next phrase, again also just sliding up, double stops, blues cliches, that's how you get that to work. And she continues with a similar phrase, kind of actually just developing the motif. And that's then here, really getting the blue note in there. And then we get another phrase that's similar, so going into some changes playing. And then we get this phrase which kind of starts out like a blues phrase, because we have sort of the high E pedal here. And that's of course blues sounding, but then it kind of just turns into a chromatic phrase. And she also starts changing the rhythm, going from 8 notes to 8-note triplets, which kind of gives it sort of groups of 4 8-note triplets or 2 8-note triplets as a sort of moving rhythm on top of the meter, and then just rounding it off down to the low E here. What we have here with all three, but especially with George Benson and Emily Remler, is that if you want to have a blues sound and you want to put that on top of a jazz progression or a jazz standard, then you want to think about what key the progression is in, and then you want to use that blues sound. That's what's going to really work as a blues sound, and you want to do that not so much by having other notes to use, but you really want to think about adding more blues phrasing. So think in blues phrases, use leading notes and use slides to get that in there, embellishments, different kinds of double stops work really well, but you have to kind of rely on the blues cliches and the blues phrases that you already hear and know, and try and fit those in there in that way. And then you can actually get away with things just kind of ignoring the changes under you. If you want to check out some more techniques on how to construct jazz blues phrases where you are mixing these different elements of blues and more playing changes, then check out this video where I'm going over 5 jazz blues licks.